Hi, Finland. Hey. Just keynoting. It's kind of hard to follow a keynote by Yanni, but I'll see what I can do. I remember when I first met Yanni, he works at the same company, Formidable, and I was like, hey there, boss, what's that accent you got there? And he said, I'm Finnish. And I go, Jesus, Yanni, we've just begun. I'm so sorry to the Finnish people for that joke. That's the first time you've heard that one. Yeah. There's more. There's more. I got to thank you for long drink. That's good stuff. I don't know why it's named that, because it doesn't last very long around me. Okay, that's enough dad jokes. So I'm Ken Wheeler. That's Ken_Wheeler on Twitter if you want to be really disappointed. And I work at a company called Formidable, which is a JavaScript consultancy based in Seattle, where we do things like Node, React, GraphQL, all kinds of JavaScriptery. And you can, if you want real tweets, you can follow them at Formidable Labs. And here, I'm here today to talk about how React changed everything. I'm going to tell a room full of React developers how good React is. Hopefully, by the end of this, everyone will like React. It's a tall order, but I'll see what I can do. Right? So I guess I want to start by putting some things into perspective, and we can ask some questions here. Right? So when's the last time that you actually used like add event listener, not on like a window? Right? It's not a thing that we do very often. When's the last time you used inner HTML? It's been ages. Or even worried about keeping your UI in sync. Further, to think about how good it actually is, how many times a day do you even have to go to the React docs? Not super often. But to understand how we got to this place where so much is taken care of and it's such a good API, we're going to have to go back in time. And we're going to go real far back. I don't know if anybody is quite as old as me, but I'm fucking old. So let's take it back to the 1990s. This is the actual McDonald's website. Now, this was an interesting time. Most of the sites were all HTML-based. You were doing tables for your layout. You had your tripod, your GeoCities. Good times. And then there weren't really applications. It was websites. So most of your apps were all server-driven, all the back and forth, right? And if you did have JavaScript, it was for making button hovers, which was amazing at the time. And design was not yet invented. We got there, right? And then something happened, right? We were making these sites, and Flash came along. I don't know. Can I see a show of hands? Who remembers Flash? Flash Dev. That's what I'm talking about. I love Flash so much. So let's talk a little bit about the Flash era. Is this loading up here? Does anybody remember Too Advanced? I hope that I have enough internet for this. But this was so lit. It was like do you have your phone internet? Are we on there? Yeah, this was the site. Oh, it was incredible. Everything was it was like you're playing Call of Duty as a website. And I remember seeing this, and this is what everybody aspired to. Everybody wanted to make we thought that was the future of the web. It was going to be this Blade Runner shit. So in Flash, there was a lot of emphasis on loading spinners. Nowadays, our loading spinners are super lazy. It's just the little thing. But back then, this was elaborate. You'd have a laser filling in a thing. It was there was so much loading taking place that you really had to dress it up. And it was an interesting paradigm because it was timeline based. It was you remember languages where you would have line go-tos. It was sort of like that, but horizontal. So you would have stop on a frame and go to and play at this frame. But it was programming embedded in the context of an animation on a timeline, which was it was interesting at the time. And everything looked like video games. And believe it or not, this actually let us do rich UIs and applications because it was contained and it was a bit more powerful than the web. Actually, I don't want to talk shit, but I haven't been able to get things on the web as nice as I had them in Flash since. So. And then, I mean, that was the timeline-based stuff, but then, things like Flex Builder and MXML came out, which were a little bit more app-centric and less like video gamey, right? So if you had ever done it, if you hadn't done it, this is kind of like what it looked like. Like you would have like this GUI builder, kind of like Visual Basic, and it was sick. It was really dope. Like you would go and you could just lay things out, absolute position style. But the cool part was, it felt like app development because you had these little component things like this right here. This is like a like button code. So you'd have a button, and then when you got to the frame, it would run this little piece of code. And this was like, I think for me, one of the first things that was like component-y, where you would have your code separate based upon the UI element. And it felt so good. And then they took it away from me, right? They just stole it. This came out, and it went away. And every New Jersey restaurant website got a little less fancy. Devastating, right? So then we had to go back to JavaScript, and fucking reluctantly at that. I was like, all right. So things had changed a little bit at this point. It wasn't like this, HTML table stuff. Now we had things like jQuery, MooTools, Dojo, and that made it a little bit better, right? So now on the server side, a lot of our applications were things like like Cake PHP or CodeIgniter. You have Rails, Django. Is it Django? Is it just the D silent? There's a joke in there somewhere I'm not going to make. But yeah, it was. We had better server technology that you would serve up your HTML with. I remember that coming back, like I was still very sad about returning to the web and not having my fancy restaurant websites. But at least jQuery had animate, so you could like hover over a button, it's boing along along, and that was the consolation prize. But largely, JavaScript was there to augment your HTML like server kind of code, right? You would have an app, but like the JavaScript was just there to do a little bit, something with forms or little animations that didn't run as fast as Flash and still don't. I'm not bitter. And then Ajax became a thing, which was an important step towards the kind of things that we're doing today, right? So this is what the code looked like when I came back to JavaScript. We had to check for whether the document was ready. I haven't done that in a while. And then you would do something like this, where you would you'd have a button click, and then I have get.json, but that's bullshit. I didn't have JSON APIs set up. You would go and you'd retrieve HTML from the server, and then you just dump it in. Just dump it, content HTML, and then just drop it in there. And that's essentially what we did. Now we learned these new tricks, and us being web developers are sneaky, and we go and see what we can push the limits on. So things got more complex, and all of our code turned to shit in time. So we needed structure, right? We needed to unspaghettify this code, right? So along comes MVC. Yeesh. It was good times. And that originally, for me at least, that was in the form of Backbone.js. So Backbone introduced, to me at least, was the first time you were doing like single page app development. It wasn't just JavaScript augmenting the server HTML. Now you can just build straight up apps, right? You had models and views and controllers, and you thought you were fancy. And it was all on the client side. And now our code was a little bit better. You would have something like this. So it's not quite where we're at today, but you would have a little event system. You'd have an initialize function. You would create your view. And the render was disgustingly manual. As React developers, we don't have to worry about that. But at the time, you would go, you'd have a template, and you would render it in every single time. But it was better, right? So things were still very manual. And then this character came along. I still don't know how to say it because it's Angularjs, and I should say Angularjs, but I colloquially call it Angular. But Angular, I guess, refers to the new Angular, not the old Angular. And it's impossible to Google for. So Angular comes along, and this was completely different, right? This was not. I mean, they had your controllers and things like that, but this was absolute magic. You would go, you could have this little template in the H1, and then you'd have the NG model, the NG app directives. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, you always have this easy demo, and then you go to build an actual app, and so Angular, they introduced two-way binding, which was special. You would see your UI update. You started to get a little bit of that automaticness, right? But it was very HTML-centric, and I hate HTML. I don't know if anybody knows that. Yeah, I'm not a big fan. So it extended your HTML. It was pitched as an extension to the HTML. And it had the live templating, which was basically magic. And it was also a framework, right? So like, I guess some of the other stuff had been a bit more dabbly up to this point, whereas this was a framework. And I guess you have the trade-off of, you have all these things taken care of for you, but anytime you want to deviate from that, it's kind of difficult to do. And along comes our boy React. So originally, I guess it was pitched as just the view layer, and I didn't really get that. I think it was doing itself a disservice. But yeah, I was like, what's this? Okay. And it was written in, like, I remember the original docs. They were academic, so it was frightening. And then you had JSX, which looked ridiculous. And one thing that taught me is, if you see an API and you're immediately repulsed by it, it's probably the shit. So, but I was like, what is this? Like, then you get over it and you try it and you're like, wow, this is really good. And, and then you have to go tell other people and they're like, what the fuck's wrong with you? And you're like, no, just hear me out, just try it. And they're like, fucking on-click. And, yeah. So, yeah, it was just the view layer. You had JSX, right, which is HTML in your JavaScript, but it's not really. And then you had state and props, which were an interesting thing, right? It was an internal and external API for these components. You had the virtual DOM, which was much more exciting then than now. But the real thing was the components, right? The components were the magical part of all this. Right? I remember there was a good tweet, a great tweet, where somebody was saying something about the virtual DOM. And years ago, Dan Abramoff said something about, like, the real thing is the components. And at the time, I'm like, yeah. But, like, now, like, I thoroughly agree with it, because the component model is the real takeaway here. So up to this point, all of your libraries were HTML first. React changed that up a little bit, right? React, HTML is just a side effect of what's going on. React is not HTML-centric. It feels like app development, right? You're doing something other than the web. You're developing your app, and then the web is the target for it. And you saw some of these things. Like this is a UI view in iOS. This is the life cycle for it. So you're seeing things that feel a little bit familiar. View did load. View will appear, did appear, will disappear, all those life cycles there. And in React, this is, you started to see those patterns there. We have all our, this is a very nice chart that I stole from Dan Abramoff that shows all the new ones. These are the new fun ones. But yeah, that was a biggie, right? But there's more to it. It's not magic, which I think is a big point here. I don't like magic very much, and when magic is good when it works, but then when it doesn't work, you have a real hard time figuring out the cause of the problem. You have to dig through layers of magic. So in React, you're manually kicking off the updates. You know generally why your things are updating. You control when those updates happen. We have control over whether this component is going to update or not based upon conditions. You control how the updates happen. And you can kind of just rely on the abstraction. So you kick it off, but as far as the actual work that's taking place, you kind of just trust that that's going to take. It's reliable magic. But the most important thing is that you're declaratively describing what should happen. So in React, you don't update your views like you would. Like we saw in the backbone example, where you were going and you had the render and you would manually update it. In React, you don't do that, right? You describe how it should update. And then you kind of just trust the abstraction to handle that for you. Say for this is you updating your view manually, like a dork. Just going through, okay, yeah, let's do inner HTML and then rebind our events or what have you. And in React, it's not like that. In React, you kind of just set it up and throw the data at it, and it's magical. That makes React look so cool, doesn't it? But that's essentially what's happening. And in React, your UI is the function of state or data. But generally speaking, you're declaratively describing what should happen. The data comes through, and then your result happens. Right? So I'm of the opinion that React is the perfect abstraction, not just in its web form, but the actual component model paradigm is my favorite way to program so far. And I think it's going to be a while before we see the jump that Yanni was talking about to something new. I'm sweating balls up here. So the reason why it's the perfect abstraction is the way that it's set up, right? It's the tree. So here's this sort of unrelated chart about the tree model. But the magic in React is when you have your components and you nest them, and you get that virtual DOM, that interstitial representation, right? It's an object where the properties are functions, but that object is a living application. It's a living tree, right? And the actual render point of that is kind of unrelated. You're building little machines. You're building a machine out of other little machines, and it can be applied anywhere. If you've seen any of my other talks, I render React to all kinds of shit. I make music with React or video games with React. And I think React Native was one of the first times that you really saw the power of that. When it was just on the web, you're like, okay, this is cool. But then you realize the power of this tree abstraction where your app just kind of exists. And then depending on your renderables, you can do what you want with it. And the paradigm is portable. This paradigm you can do in different languages, as we saw in Leland's thing, where he's doing it in other languages. I know people who were native developers who started following that pattern natively just because it was a good pattern. So I think that's what really makes it special. Previously, we were just kind of taking HTML and retrofitting our stuff on top of it, and it was not as cool. And now we're kind of just building our own thing from scratch. Sick Chiefs. We're building our applications kind of outside of that, and then kind of saying, okay, we'll do the HTML for this part. Or if anybody's done like a React Native web, you go native first. That's actually my preferred abstraction. Is I like the React Native programming model with views and text. So I know it's going to come as a shock, but I think the web is fundamentally unfit for application development. Woo! So when you think about it, right? Like when the web started, it was a document model, right? So it was pages. It was things that you're reading through. It's like it's websites, not web apps. And now we figured out we're going to make web apps, but the platform that we're building it on, we're essentially making apps out of PDF primitives. It's not application primitives. So the React Native model, when you have view and you have text and you compose with that, that's an abstraction in itself, which can be applied to all different kinds of things. And then if you write it in native first, then the web is just a place where you can say, oh, okay, a view is a div and text is a span, and it works. Now, the paradigm, I think we can all agree in this room, is good. I don't think there's any React haters here. But in my opinion, the absolute best part about React, wait for it, we're all going to do the hug, is the community. Everybody give yourself No, I'm completely dead serious about that. because React is just a small part of this group of programmers and this I guess like network of crazy ass people that are really driving things forward. Right? So let's talk about the React community and the React kids. Right? They're wildly innovative. I mean, at least in the larger React community, you're seeing some wild stuff come out, some things that are applied across other frameworks. Other frameworks are taking inspiration from React. A lot of the innovation in front end is taking place in this community today. And one thing that's great, I think, is that people are generally not afraid to think outside of the box. They're just doing things that are just wrong. Or, they're not wrong. They're, later proven to be right. But when you see them, you're like, what? And they're not afraid to break the rules. So, like Yanni said yesterday about the cops, there's a lot of cops out there, but in React, there's actually not too many cops. It's almost a competition to see who can do the craziest shit. And a lot of the time it works out. You see things like styled components, right? That's bananas. And I suppose it's React centric with the components, but just a lot of these ideas that these extraordinarily gifted 19-year-old kids are coming out with, they're good. They're good. Yeah, and I'm just an old guy thinking it's cool hanging out here with a hat and like, hey there, fellow kids. And it's funny. It's the only time in development that I've ever seen. Basically, React turned a bunch of people into a bunch of fucking armchair computer scientists. Like you have, all these people who are like, oh yeah, do you see this new React thing? And they're like, no, man, I've been writing Clojure. Like, people are going, they're writing Clojure, like, yeah, I just did a thesis on Haskell and shit. And you're like, what? Like, okay, But it's cool because they go and they're smarter than me. And they'll go and hit these languages and things like that, and then they'll come back and they'll bring it back to React. You have like Dan who went and did Elm, and then comes back, and you get Redux as a result of that. And I think it's really cool because I guess the spirit of the React dev is this like wearing jeans to baseball practice kind of just going crazy. So I guess the bigger question is, now that I've convinced a room full, or hopefully convinced a room full of React developers that React is in fact good, have I? Yes. Okay, yeah. Woo, React, am I right? So where do we go from here, right? What's going to happen moving forward? So let's talk a little bit about the future of React, which I am uniquely unqualified to speak about. So async is a big thing. Right? That's the next thing that we're going to be doing. All the fiber stuff, like I remember, I guess when 16 first came out, and they're like, all right, the fiber switch is on. The first thing for me was custom fiber renderers. That was what I was excited about. Because now, previously, if you wanted to make a custom renderer, you had to do like an injection, but now they had like the first class renderer creator, so I could do all my dumb Gallagher prop React talks. But what they were doing is they were really laying the groundwork for all this async stuff. So it's not immediately apparent, but now we're starting to see these things leak out and get in there. And 17 is probably where we're going to see some of the crazier stuff. So I guess you asked everybody if they saw Suspense yesterday. Thanks, Jan. So I know a lot of people have seen the Suspense. But Suspense is huge. And that's another one of those things where, on its face, it's ridiculous. I remember when I forget, I think it was Andrew first told me about it. He's like, "All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna throw a promise." I'm like, "I'm sorry." We're gonna throw a promise. What the fuck are you gonna? I'm like, "You can do that?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay." But that's another example of like it's bananas, these things that like JSX where you're like, what? And then he's like, bear with me. And he's like, yeah, so it's like a continuation model and algebraic effects. And I'm like, I'm gonna go back to college. But you throw a promise and you can suspend the actual render process, and it'll go and it'll do an effect and come back and continue the render process. And it's not even officially out yet. Some people might have seen Dan's talk at Iceland, where he was showing some of the things you can do with that. But when fully implemented, there's going to be a whole gang of libraries, and I don't know, one of these smart young whippersnappers is probably going to do some crazy styled components type thing, and not like that, but some wild library that uses it. It's a great fundamental piece. And while it's crazy to think that throwing a promise, right, that's a way that you can achieve that using JavaScript, because we're kind of bound by JavaScript. So as web developers, your entire day is clever hacks to get this fucking thing to work. And then with that is also the time slicing. So they're taking APIs like a render idle callback and breaking the stuff into little pieces and then scheduling it and fitting it in where they can. So the async stuff is going to be a huge part moving forward of at least React development on the web. Right? And the next thing I think is going to be optimization and user experience. Like Yanni was saying yesterday, I just keep referring to your talk. It was so fucking good, Jan. Like Yanni was saying yesterday, we've gotten over the and now this is where we clean everything up. The other 90%. So React has amazing developer experience. It's probably the best that I've felt so far. And you see a lot of people on Twitter complaining about bundle sizes and things like that. And they're complaining and saying, you shouldn't use React, I digress. But I think that there's value. I think the most common thing that people say, they're going to come up and they're going to be like, they're like, oh, well, what about your users? I'm like, don't you bring the fucking users into this. But I think that focusing on the DX first is important, because what happens is when you have something that's fun to write, when you have something that's good, you get developers to come use it, right? So you have all these smart people, much smarter than myself, coming to use it, and they're actually in a better position to then do the UX after all the stuff is settled. So I think focusing on the DX it's a good call, because if you focus just on the users first and nobody wants to write it, guess what? Nobody's going to write it. So now it's time to optimize. So I think what we're going to see is our React apps get faster, smaller, and simpler. What's the name of that project? The component flattening? Oh, prepack. Yeah, you're going to see things like prepack get more mature, where you're going to see more of this optimization in place. And you're going to see React API stuff. Everything that they're doing in the React API, anytime they update something or break something or change something, it's for a really good reason. So we'll probably see stuff like classes go away, things like that, because what they're going to be doing is just setting it up so that this can now run optimized turbo cool mode, right? Now here's the other part of it. Again, I'm not a big web fan, and I think JavaScript's cool, right? But it's inherently limited here and there. How many people have heard of Reason? How many people have written Reason? All right. So Reason is amazing, and I think you should try it. I don't think React on the web is going anywhere, right? But as far as where React could go, right? We have this component model, this paradigm, and it's portable, and we don't have to stay in JavaScript. So where is that going to end up? If it's going to go anywhere, if anything is going to be inspired by the React model moving forward, where else can we go with that? And React Web's still going to be on its own thing, right? But if we were to fork or diverge, do something new, I think this is it. I think this is where it's going to go, and it makes sense, right? It looks kind of JavaScript-y, but it's not. This is what a component looks like in Reason React, which is a React implementation in Reason. It looks JavaScript-y enough. So what it actually is it's a syntax on top of OCaml. OCaml is a systems language. So it has modern functional language features that are really fun to play with. Things like you have like pipe operators and pattern matching and it's a really nice way to program things. And once you use it, if you write something in it, you're like woo, and then you go write JavaScript and you're just slumming it. And it's typed. Here's the thing about this. I don't know. Some people are in the TypeScript camp. Other people are in the Flow camp. But types in JavaScript are bolt-on and feel like it. When you use something like this, where the types are there from the get-go, you're like, oh wow, like this is how this should be. And then you come back to do something like TypeScript or Flow, and you get frustrated because of how good it works here. So the types in Reason are amazing. And one of the big, I guess, why I'm betting on it is it's created by the dude who made React, right? So he originally wrote React in this ML language, and his eggs are in this basket, and he made React, and I'm just a dummy, so I think I'm gonna go with that, and I think you should try it. So the two talks after me, I think the next two are about Reason. And I'm looking forward to it, and you should definitely watch them because Reason is amazing, and I think it's going to be more and more a part of your day as a developer. What's really cool about it, with me and all the the crazy shit I like to do, is that it has multiple compile targets. So it compiles to native code. Again, you know how I feel about the web. So there's a project called reprocessing, which is a processing port for Reason. And you're writing these like this ES 2080 type code, and it compiles to native iOS apps. It compiles to native Android apps. It compiles to GL on the desktop, and then it compiles to GL on the web. Once you use it and you see the power in it, it's hard to not think that that's the future of where things are going. All right, so takeaways from here. I think I convinced everyone that React is good. But I guess the biggest thing is that I wanted to stress is that I think we all think React is good. I think we all think React's not going anywhere. But we all have the React-y spirit of trying new things, having an open mind, which is important. Don't be afraid to throw promises or put HTML in your JavaScript or what have you. So I think moving forward, if we want to move forward, we have to not be afraid to do those things. So just keep being a bunch of lunatics that break the rules and wear jeans to baseball practice. Thank you.